Hello and welcome to the Beach House 34 podcast. I'm your host, Christine Worth. A warm welcome to all the new subscribers. Your support is appreciated so much. If you are not yet subscribed, especially on the YouTube channel, please hit that like button and then click subscribe. It doesn't cost you a thing, and it does help the channel so much. If you're here, you know that I've covered the Darlie Routier trial transcripts from the very beginning, and we are now on part 4 and the final part where Darlie testifies for herself. The prosecution is still questioning Darlie, and we learn about some letters that were intercepted. I guess there's probably a better way to say that, but intercepted, that Darlie had written while in jail, where she claims to know who did this crime. So let's continue with part 4 of Darlie Routier's testimony. Okay, so we're going to begin again with the prosecution's questioning, and it's actually Mr. Toby Shook questioning of Darlie. But before we do, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of where we left off because it's important, I think, to where we're starting. So at the end of the previous episode, if you remember, Mr. Toby Shook of the prosecution had asked Darlie about whether or not it said fighting within the 911 tape or recording. And she says, I don't think it says fighting. She believes it says frightening. And they go back and forth, and it's starting to get a little bit testy. Mr. Shook had said, can I take that as a yes then? And she's like, I think it's frightening. You were frightening? Yes, sir. You can listen to it. Oh, I have. I know you have. I have lots of times. So have I. So that's where we ended up. This is where we're beginning today. And at this point, the court has just said, all right, let's just ask questions and answers, please. Mr. Shook then continues questioning Darlie. Do you remember talking to Detective Waddell there when he came into your house? Very briefly. Okay, did you tell Detective Waddell that you had been fighting with the man there at the island area? No, sir, it would have been on the call as well, and it's not on there. Okay, you never told him that anytime he was in your house? No, sir, I didn't. Okay. You remember the paramedic, the one with the nickname Toad? I only remember them really by their faces. He was the one that actually put the bandage on you and walked you out? I don't remember. Okay. I thought that there were 2 of them. Did you ever make the statement there in your living room in front of the paramedics then that the man was wearing a ball cap and he broke out the window in the garage? I don't ever remember saying that. Okay, so you don't remember if you said that or not? No, sir. Okay, do you remember talking to Detective Patterson and Detective Frosch down there after your operation? I do remember some of that. Yes, sir. Okay, and do you remember telling them that morning that the man was standing over you and you fought with him on the couch? No, I heard Patterson say that, but I don't remember saying anything about that. So it was Detective Patterson that suggested that? I think that is what, when he came up here, isn't that what he said? He said that, he said, are you fighting with him on the couch? I'm not sure. He just said something along those lines. I thought when he was sitting up here, when he was up here the other day. Well, you remember the nurse, Chris Wilgus? Again, I only remember the people as they came in here by their face. Okay. He was the nurse with glasses that tended to you when you got out of the operating room. He was the nurse present when Detective Patterson and Frosch talked to you? I really don't remember that. The nurse that gave you the truth serum? I really don't remember him. Okay. Well, you remember him testifying, don't you? Well, there's been a lot of people to testify. Do you remember his description of how the detectives questioned you? I don't remember who you are talking about specifically. Okay. It would be the nurse that was there with the detectives? Well, I know, but there were a couple of nurses. Well, do you remember someone testifying that said they were present while the detectives were questioning you? I think so. I sort of remember that. Yes. Okay. Well, that is who we're talking about. Okay. And do you remember his description was that the detectives went slowly and methodically? I really don't remember what his exact words were. That they never suggested answers to you? Sir, I don't remember what I mean, there's been so many people testifying. I don't. Okay. Are you saying then today that Detective Patterson was suggesting answers to you? Suggesting as in, what do you mean? Fighting on the couch? What do you mean? He was telling me. Well, I think that is what you were trying to get across, that you didn't come up with the word fighting. That was Detective Patterson? Sir, I don't even remember that. Okay. You don't have any memory of that as far as fighting? Fighting on telling Detective Patterson that you fought with the man on the couch? No, I don't. I mean, I don't think that I said that. I could have said that, but I don't remember saying that. Okay, so you could have said that? Yes, sir. Okay. I mean, I think that you can have, memory, especially in that situation. Okay. Then you got transferred up to the ICU floor? I guess so. You don't remember that? No, sir. Do you remember telling the nurse, Diane Holland, that you felt pressure on you and you woke up and a man was standing over you? I don't remember. I remember their faces when they came in here and when you guys were talking to them, but I don't. When you say you are familiar with them, I am not. She was the nurse that attended you from about 8 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. The tall girl with brown hair, tall girl with brown hair was with you for about 11 hours. What was her name? Diane Holland. I don't remember, but I'll try to answer your questions. Do you remember telling her that you felt pressure on you? The man was standing over you. I do remember feeling pressure on my legs. Do you remember telling her that the man was standing over you and you fought him off? No, sir, I don't remember that. Okay. I do remember the pressure, though, on my legs. All right. Where was it on your legs? It was on my right leg. On your right leg? Yes, sir. Okay. Do you remember telling the nurse, Paige Campbell, she is the small nurse with blonde hair? I think I remember Paige Campbell because she gave me a shower, I think. Okay. Do you remember that you showed her your hand and you said, quote, "This is where he cut me when I tried to grab the knife"? No, sir. You don't remember telling her that? No, sir. I remember her giving me a shower. Okay. Do you remember telling her that you woke up and the man was standing over you and tried to stab you with a knife? No, sir. Okay. Are you saying you just don't remember that or that didn't happen? I'm just saying I don't remember that. Okay. So you could have said that? I suppose it's possible. Okay. If you had said that, would that not mean that you do remember this attack? I don't remember this attack as of right now. I do not remember. Okay. Do you remember talking to the nurse, Denise Falk? That is the last nurse that testified, the one that had you. I remember her up here, but I don't remember her in there. Okay. And do you remember she is the one that took the pink notes of what you said? Yes, I remember her sitting up here. Okay. And do you remember telling her about 3 o'clock in the morning that when you were laying on your right side, that you told her, quote, "I was laying just like this"? First of all, I can't imagine. Can I see a picture of my arm? Do you have a picture of the arm? Well, why don't you? I'll show you a picture of the arm in a minute. Okay. I don't imagine that I would be laying on the right side with my arm like that. So that didn't happen. I'm just saying that I don't believe that I would lay. I mean, if you look at that picture, I don't think anybody would be laying on that arm as what you are saying. I think you could lay on it like this with the arm out. Okay. But not like this. Okay. Do you think she might have been making that up? No, sir. I think maybe either she has misunderstood or has gotten her information wrong. Okay. So maybe she misunderstood what you said? Yes. Of course, if you are laying on your right side, your back would be exposed to any blood you might get on it, would it? Well, I'm not sure I understand. Do you remember telling Denise Falk that you woke up when Damon started touching you and crying? I really don't remember that. Do you remember telling her that you felt a wrestling at your neck area? No, sir, I don't remember that. You just don't remember that? No, sir. Again, I guess if you did tell her that, that would indicate that you did have some memory of this attack, wouldn't it? Well, I don't remember that. You don't know of any reason that Denise Falk would have to come down here and lie about that, do you? I don't know of any reason. No. I mean, y'all didn't know each other before this, did you? No, sir, but can you think of a good reason? Well, I have heard a lot of things that do you think all of the nurses might have gotten together and come down here and no, sir, I don't think that. That is not what I'm saying. I just think that maybe a lot of people, a lot of time went by, and I think that you can definitely, well, you heard her, she wrote it down, and the court says, well, let her finish her answer. Do you want to add any more? And Darlie says, well, I just think that you can definitely take things out of context after a certain period of time. Mr. Shook then continues, well, as far as time goes by, you heard her testimony. She wrote those notes down? Yes, sir, I did. When she got home, pretty fresh on her mind? She has got the notes. Okay. But how do we know that those were written then? Do you think she lied about it? No, I'm not saying that. Okay, well, do you think we can trust her? She seems like a nice person. Okay. Have you told anyone else that a man was standing over you and you woke up and he tried to stab you? Just as far as the dream that I had. Just the dream? Yes. When did your memory start getting better? I mean, I guess you don't remember much that happened in the hospital, do you? No, I don't even remember as far as my relatives being there. I have had a lot of different people say that they talked to me and came and saw me that I don't remember. Okay. You remember everything up until this attack, don't you? What went on in the evening? To a certain extent. I mean, yeah. I mean, your memory is not fuzzy on when Darren got home. No, sir. Or what you did all day? No, sir. I was conscious then. Yes, sir. Your memory is not fuzzy on having your little sister Dana there and what the boys were doing, is it? No, sir. It's not fuzzy as to what you and Darren talked about, is it? To a certain extent, no, sir. Okay. But then as far as any of the facts of this offense goes, you don't remember a thing about that, do you? No, I can speculate, but I don't know to sit here and tell you. I can't tell you that. Then your memory gets kind of good again because you give a lot of details in your voluntary statement about what happened after you saw. I think if I lived to be 100, I wouldn't be able to tell you everything that happened that night. Okay. For detail. Well, you gave us a lot of details. I gave some things, yes, sir. And you were able to give a lot of details on the 8th when you wrote this statement out? Yes, sir. But I still think that there's a lot of things to this day that, but as far as where the paramedics were, what Darren was doing, what you were able to write that all down on June the 8th, weren't you? Not every bit of it, but some of it. Yes, sir. Well, we will be able to see for ourselves what all you wrote down. Yes, sir. I think we have already gone over that. Okay. But then again, at the hospital, when all of these statements are made to these nurses, yes, sir, your memory is gone again, isn't it? I just don't remember now. You just don't remember those? No, sir. It kind of goes in and out. Yes, sir. I have been told that that is common. Okay. But I guess it got better on the 8th when you were writing this statement out. A little bit, but not much. Okay. And as far as, like I said, to this day, there is still a lot of steps that I don't remember. Okay. And you remember going to the police station and giving this statement, don't you? Yes, sir. It was before the viewing. And then you went to the viewing after that? Yes, sir. I was almost 2 hours late. And then the next day was the funeral? Yes, sir. Okay. Then there was a birthday party after the funeral at your mother's house, wasn't there? That has kind of been misunderstood as a birthday party. It wasn't a birthday party? Well, after a funeral, people go to the person's home and they get together and eat or talk and console each other. And the kids were there and they were swimming out in the back. And I had given my little sister the sand art for them to do sand art for Devin for his birthday. So you are saying that there wasn't a birthday party at your mother's house? It wasn't really a birthday party. Okay. I guess your good friend Karen Neal was just mixed up about that. No, sir. Okay. Were your aunts there? Your aunts from Pennsylvania? Were they there at your mother's house? I don't remember. Okay. I think they could have been, but I'm not exactly sure. Okay. I mean, because we had relatives that were staying at hotels and they were going back and forth. But by that, you do remember going to the party, don't you? Your memory wasn't bad at that point, was it? Really, I don't remember much about that day. I stayed in the house and pretty much I don't really remember too much about that. Well, your other good friend in the neighborhood is Mercedes Adams. Yes, sir. Do you remember that next week going over to her house and talking to her? I think I went over to her house and to Karen's. Okay. And do you remember talking to her in her family room area? I don't really remember it, but yes, it is possible that I did that. Her house has the same exact floor plan as your house does, doesn't it? Yeah, to some extent. Yes, it does. Okay. And back in that family room, she has kind of set her furniture up following your example, hasn't she? Two couches? Well, I don't know about that. Okay. Do you remember talking to her about what happened there in that family room on that couch? About about what happened that night? About everything that happened that night? Well, just describing to her what happened that night. Do you remember talking to her about that night? I'm sure I did. I talked to Mercedes about a lot of things. I talked to her about that. I talked to her about everything that was going on. Okay, well, let me talk specifically about that. Do you remember telling Mercedes Adams that Damon woke you up? And when you woke up, there was a man standing over you and he tried to stab you in the heart and you were able to block his blow. And that is how this cut got on your left side? No, sir. I mean, I think I did tell her that, but that was about a dream that I had. Okay, you did tell her that though. I believe so. But that was a dream you had? Yes, sir. Just like I said before. I had about 7 or 8 dreams just like that. So when you told her this, did you say, Mercedes, this is a dream I had about what happened? Well, I don't know if I said it in those exact words. You mean you might have been able to tell her that and just not mention that it was a dream you were having? I don't think so. You don't think so? No, sir. So you think before you went through that rendition of it, you would have told her this is a dream I had? Well, in some perspective like that, yes, sir. Okay. I think that I would have said that. So she wouldn't have thought any way that you were trying to tell her what had happened that night? No, sir. I did tell her what the psychic told us about what happened. Well, I'm not asking you about what the psychic said. Well, it was the same thing. Okay. So this was just a dream you were telling Mercedes about? Yes, sir. Okay. Do you remember having a conversation with Mercedes later when she asked you how you could sleep through this killing? I don't really remember her asking me that. You don't remember that? She could have, but I really don't remember. She could have asked you that? Yes, sir. Do you remember her asking, how could you sleep through your boys being stabbed? How did you sleep through it? That is a question I have asked myself many times. Well, do you remember telling her, quote, well, I was on sleeping pills that night, Mercedes? No, I don't think I said that. You didn't say that? No. I mean, you weren't on sleeping pills, were you? No, sir, I wasn't. Okay. When was it that you started sleeping downstairs on the couch? We had slept downstairs on the couch for quite some time. I mean, off and on. It wasn't an all the time thing. That evening, you were watching TV. Is that right? Yes, sir. But your head was at this end of the couch, right? Yes, sir, it was. The TV is behind you? Yes, sir. How long had you been laying in that position? I had been laying that way the whole time. How could you watch TV in that position? You are on your stomach and you are looking at the TV. Okay. So you were laying there on your stomach watching TV that way. Yes, sir. And you decided to sleep on the couch downstairs. Yes, sir. How many nights in a row had you done that? I didn't do it the night before. The boys had a friend over, and I may have done it before that, and I may have done it the Friday, the week before that with my little sister. Okay. Did you not tell the police there on the 6th that you had been sleeping downstairs for about the last 5 days? Well, I don't remember saying the last 5 days. Well, why did you choose to sleep down there that night? Well, the boys were down there sleeping. And Damon, if he wakes up every night and he comes into our bedroom and he gets in bed with us. If Devin wakes up, he usually wakes up and then goes back to sleep, but Damon doesn't do that. And so I wanted to make sure that I was down there with Damon. Well, why didn't you just put Damon in his bed? Because it was already late and they were already sound asleep. It was our home. It was our home, sir. I mean, what is wrong with sleeping downstairs? Do you usually let your children lay on the floor and sleep at night? Sometimes. Okay. That was a normal practice? Yes, sir, it was. Okay. Why did you want to sleep downstairs then? Because mainly my children were down there. Okay. And why did you want to sleep down there with the children? Because of Damon. Because he would wake up at night? Yes, sir. And he would cry. He would cry? Yes, sir. If you weren't right there? Yes, sir. Okay. When he wakes up in his bed, does he start crying? In his bed? Yes. No, he usually comes into our room. Okay. Like if he had a bad dream, or sometimes he would wet the bed. Okay. But you decided not to take them upstairs and put them in their beds after they were asleep? No, sir. Okay. And you had the window open? From what I remember, it was open. Okay. Now, you weren't sleeping on the couch because you had some disagreement with your husband, were you? That night? Was I sleeping there? Yes. No, sir. Okay. You weren't down there sleeping separate from him because you were mad at him? No, sir. As a matter of fact, when we went to bed, we had both told each other that we loved each other and we would see each other in the morning. Okay. And that dog you had, he barks a lot at strangers, doesn't he? He does bark a lot if he is awake. If he is awake? Yes, sir. He is not a real old dog, is he? No, I believe he is a couple of years. Okay. I guess he just slept through this whole thing also? No, actually, I think when everybody started arriving, he was barking. I think Karen had to go up and get him. Okay. He can make a lot of noise when he wants to, can't he? Yes, sir. Okay. What about that big cat that was right next to your head? Does he sleep well too? He wasn't right next to my head, but I think animals are kind of like people. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, they sleep and eat just like we do. They don't wake up when strangers come into the room? I don't know, sir. I don't know if he did or not. Oh, and this man that you saw, you said he had a t-shirt. Are you talking about a short-sleeved t-shirt? I don't know for sure if it was short-sleeved, but you think it was short-sleeved? I think it was short-sleeved. Okay. Now, your finances. Are you trying to tell the jury that you didn't have any financial problems at all? No, sir, I am not trying to say that at all. Had business been slow? Yes, it had. And how long had it been slow? It was a little bit slow. I think March and April had been slower than what we were used to. May had picked up. Just March and April. Are those the only slow months you had that were slow? Okay. Yes, sir. Okay. Money wasn't tight at that time? Yes, money was tight. Okay. But the bills were being paid. Okay. As a matter of fact, I think we withdrew $11,000 out of our account as far as draws in May, which is one of our biggest draws that we had. I guess if those are reflected in the records, we could see that. Yes, sir, they do, as a matter of fact. Okay. Do you recognize 83-B? Yes, sir, I do. Okay. And were y'all 2 months behind on your mortgage? No, sir. And this was found in the trash that came out of our Pathfinder that I guess the detectives or whoever looked for it, it was found in the trash in the garage. Right. And it was in the trash because it had been paid and taken care of. Right. But when you received this in May, had y'all been 2 months behind on the mortgage payment? No, sir, we weren't. We were 1 month behind, and the next one was coming up. And were you 1 month behind because you all had been real short on money? No, actually, we were 1 month behind because I completely forgot. I had just started paying bills at home when I was used to paying them at the shop. So you had just forgotten to make that payment? Well, there was actually a couple of bills that I had forgotten to make. Same thing on the American Express bill, I guess. I'm not sure about that American Express bill. And despite I do know that it was paid, but I don't remember seeing that. Okay. Despite being strapped for money, you were planning on going to Pennsylvania for 2 weeks? Yes, sir. Then you were going to go down to Mexico with your good friend Mercedes? Yes, sir. Was that going to be in July? Yes, sir. Okay. And you had a lot of jewelry out that wasn't taken in this attack. Is that right? Yes, sir. That was the photographs with all of the jewelry that we have seen on the bar? Yes, sir. And you usually wore those on your fingers, did you not? Yes, sir. Was it your practice to wear rings on every finger? Sometimes. You bought a lot of jewelry, didn't you? My husband bought me a lot of jewelry. Did you ever shop for jewelry yourself? Not by myself. You never went into these pawn shops by yourself? Not by myself. No, sir. Was Darren always with you? Yes, sir. Did you take the children with you sometimes when you went shopping? I think there were a couple of times. Did you take them into the pawn shop when you went shopping? Maybe a couple of times. So you are saying that Darren was the one who would buy the jewelry for you? Well, we would look at it together. Okay. And that was one of your hobbies. Is that right? Well, I don't know if you would call it a hobby. Okay. Had you not been having fights up at work with your husband in 96, in March and April? We had ups and downs just like everybody else does. Were you not fighting more frequently over money? No, sir. That just wasn't happening? No, sir. You weren't having loud arguments at work over money? No, sir. If we had arguments at work, usually it was about something that had happened with a job. Okay. Not over money or anything like that. No, sir. Mr. Toby Shook then says, Judge, could we approach the bench for a second? And the court says, certainly. And Mr. Shook says, just for a moment. And the court says, certainly. And at this point, a short discussion is held off the record, and then the proceedings are resumed. And the court says, all right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, once more, you will have to step out of the courtroom briefly, please. So the jury is excused. And the court continues and says, all right, just a minute. Let the record reflect that all parties in the trial are present and these proceedings are being held outside the presence of the jury. Mr. Shook says, no, Judge, this is not a hearing. I need to go back there for a moment. And the court says, all right. And Mr. Shook says, about 10 minutes. And the court says, well, let's take a 10-minute break then. All right. So this short recess was taken. And then the proceedings are resumed on the record. And the court says, all right, are both sides ready to bring the jury in and resume the trial? And Mr. Davis says, yes, sir, the state is ready. Mr. Mulder says, yes, sir, the defense is ready. And the court says, all right, bring the jury in, please. So the jury is now brought back into the courtroom. And the court says, let the record reflect that all parties in the trial are present and the jury is seated. Mr. Shook. And Mr. Shook says, thank you. And his cross-examination is resumed. Ma'am, do you remember calling up a radio show back on December 5th and talking to a man by the name of Rick Roberts up in Dallas? Yes, sir. Okay. Do you need me to wait? Are you okay? Yes, sir. Okay, I can wait if you need a moment. No, I'm fine. Okay. I've got a typed transcript of that, but do you remember telling him, let me show you the statement? And you said, quote, it happened, but I just want people to keep an open mind. I want people to know that I did not murder my children. I know what happened in the house that night. Yes, sir. Okay. And then you repeated it again. Quote, I know what happened in that house that night. Yes, sir. Okay. Now, I brought Glenn in here earlier, and you said that he didn't match the description, right? We could rule him out. Well, he is too large. Okay. And we could rule him out? Yes, sir. But in the past, you have made lots of statements, written letters to your family and friends saying it was Glenn, haven't you? I didn't say it was Glenn. You made lots of statements in the past, haven't you? Yes, sir. Do you remember writing a letter to your Aunt Sandy on November 1st of 1996? Do you remember doing that? Can I see the letter, please? Sure. Yes. Do you see at the top there, Aunt Sandy? Yes, sir. That is a copy of a letter you wrote her, isn't it? Yes, sir. Okay. And do you remember telling her, quote, we believe we know who did it. That FBI guy is working on it. We have 2 months to work on it. We already have so much on him. I really believe he did it. Darren will have to tell you about him. It's a long story. I know it's him. I saw him and I know it's him. Yes, sir. You wrote that to your aunt? Yes, sir. Can I see this page a minute, please? Sure. Yes, sir. That's it. Okay. So in this letter, you say, quote, I saw him and I know it's him. I don't think that we were talking about Glenn at that time. Well, you were talking about someone that you thought did it. Yes, sir. Who did you think did it back on November 1st? There was another man that lived in the neighborhood that some people were telling me about. Okay. Well, you say in the letter, quote, I saw him. Yes, sir. I mean, that is a pretty positive statement. Quote, I saw him and I know he did it. Are you talking about that other man or are you talking about Glenn? I'm talking about the other man that they were telling me about. Okay. Then let me show you another letter to your good friend Karen. Yes. Do you recognize that? May I see it? Sure. Do you recognize that as a copy of the letter to your friend Karen? Yes, sir. That is my handwriting. You say in that letter, and you even underline it, quote, Karen, I know who did it. I can't write it down. They read my mail. Yes, sir. At the time, I was hoping. You were just hoping? Yes. Okay. So I had been told a lot about 2 different people. Okay. Let me show you another letter to Karen. Do you recognize that? Let me read it. Okay. Do you recognize that letter to your friend Karen? Yes, sir. Okay. Yes, sir. Okay. And in this letter, you say, quote, I believe Glenn did it. Yes, sir. Quote, Renee's old friend, Allison. Yes, sir. Well, Glenn was her stepfather. Mom and Darren can give you all the details. This man is very evil, and I told the police about him in the beginning. Unquote. Yes, sir. Quote, and I thought the PD checked it out, but they didn't. Unquote. Yes, sir. So we're talking about Glenn there, aren't we? In that one, yes, sir. There were 2 different people that I was told about. I was told a lot of things about. Well, in these letters, you are saying you saw the man and he is the one who did it. I saw the back of the man. Okay, well, I didn't know what Glenn looked like. Well, we have another letter here to Dear Joe and Terry. May I ask you where you are getting all of these letters from, sir? Do you recognize this letter? I would like to know where you are getting the letters from. Do you recognize this letter? Yes, sir. Okay. Let me look at it. Okay. First, oh, the jail file in the central room. Isn't that illegal? No, it's not. It's not? Okay. I thought it was. Okay. Do you recognize that letter to Joe and Terry? In just a second. Yes, sir. Okay. I remember that. That is the other man. That is the other man? Yes, sir. And you described this other man? Yes, sir. Okay. Y'all were working on it? I'm sorry, what? Did this other man live in the neighborhood, you say? Yes, sir. Okay. And down the street, I guess, is that right? Yes, sir. Do you remember telling her, quote, we know he left the sock directly in the path towards his home, unquote. That is what it says. Quote, we know he was outside his home at 2:30 that morning, unquote. Yes, sir, that is true. And his wife gave a statement? Yes, sir. Quote, 2 a.m. She heard him come back at 2:30 a.m. And all the people behind us gave statements that they woke up at 2:30 a.m. with the dogs barking, unquote. That is what I was told. Quote, Devin and Damon knew this man, unquote. Did they know this man? They did. What is his name? His name is Gary. His name is Gary what? Gary. Yes, sir. Quote, and he lives in the same house as ours, the same floor plan, unquote. What does Gary look like? I don't know, sir. You don't know what he looked like? No, they told me some people went by his house and told me what he looked like. He fits the description. He has longer hair. He has big arms and a wide back. Yes, sir. Okay. And he is heavier around the middle? Yes, sir. Is that the description that you gave the police? Yes, sir. I believe so. Is that what you remember? Yes, sir. I mean, a while back, you didn't tell this jury about anyone being wide around the middle or having big arms. Well, did you? Well, as big as Chris Frosch, that is pretty big to me. And then in that same letter, you said, quote, this man could be on his balcony and see into our backyard, unquote. That is what I was told, sir. Quote, where the hot tub is, unquote. That is what I was told. Quote, and who knows how many times he watched me, unquote. Yes, sir. Okay. Now, you know that no one could watch you from any balcony in your hot tub, don't you? No, I don't. That is what I was told. Your hot tub is covered, isn't it? Yes, it is, but it had open windows all the whole way around it. It's all covered. We can see that in these photographs. Yes, sir, but all those windows are open a lot. You have been in your backyard many times, haven't you? Yes, sir. And you know that there is no house anywhere in your neighborhood that has a balcony that can see in your backyard. There is a house, sir. There is? Down the street. Down the street? Where is it? How far down the street is it? Down at the very end of the street. Down at the end of the street? And that is what I was told. Can you show us? Yes, sir. Okay, all right. That is not the same. What is not the same? It doesn't look the same. There is like a cutoff here. This looks further to me. This is further away. Okay. But it would be down here, way down here. Yes, sir. Okay. And you are saying that someone could get on their balcony and down at the end of the block and look and see you inside your hot tub? Sir, all I'm saying is that is what I was told. Is that possible? I'm saying what I was told. Well, is that possible? I don't know, sir. I have not been out there. You have been in your backyard? I have not been to the other person's balcony. Do you think that the other person at the other end of the block could see you? I have no idea. What that is just a lie, isn't it? It's not a lie, sir, is what was told to me. You are just lying to your relatives? I'm not lying to my relatives. That was told to me. Okay, here is another letter to your Aunt Sherry and family. Do you recognize that? Yes, sir, I do. Okay. And in this letter, don't you say, quote, I know who did it, and it's driving me crazy that he is out there running free. What really makes me angry is that I gave the Rowlett PD his name in the beginning, and I assumed they would check him out, but they never did. Now he has had time to make up a story, but I believe if he has a lot of pressure, he will break, unquote. Sir, the man that did this is out there running free. Did you write that? Yes, I did. That is supposed to be Glenn, isn't it? Well, either Glenn or Gary. Well, you say in this letter that you gave his name to the Rowlett Police Department, and you have already testified that the one name that you gave was Glenn's. Is that right? Yes, sir. So you are talking about Glenn in this letter, aren't you? Yes, I think so. Yes, sir. You say, quote, I know who did it, unquote. Yes, sir. Okay. This is a letter to your friend Melanie. Is that right? Yes, sir. Do you recognize that? Yes, sir. Okay. And in this letter, do you not say, wait, can I see the back of it? Sure. In this letter, don't you say, quote, I am praying that they will be able to get a confession from Glenn, unquote. Yes, sir. I can't believe the police never even checked him out. Yes, sir. You are talking about Glenn, right? Yes, sir. The police never did check him out until later. Well, you have told this jury that we could rule out Glenn, right? Yes, sir. Now that I have seen him. Okay. Again, here is another letter I want to show you. To your Aunt Luann. Is that your Aunt Luann up in Pennsylvania? Yes, sir. Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, and in that letter, you say, quote, we know who did it, and we're trying to get more on him. Unless we can get him to confess or say something to someone, I'm not sure how we can get him, unquote. Yes, can I see that just a minute? Sure. This was not to my Luann in Pennsylvania. This is another Luann. Another Luann that is in our family. Now, some of these letters obviously were to your friend Karen Neal. Is that right? Yes, sir. You said, quote, we know who did it. Glenn did it. Yes, sir. Okay, I guess she forgot about that when we asked her if she remembered any other version that you had told her. Karen? Karen, I don't know. You would have to, I don't remember. Okay, now, Mrs. Routier, you say your panties were gone? Yes, sir. Were you wearing them before the attack? Yes, sir. Okay, but they were gone, I guess. When did you realize they were gone? After I was told sometime later. Okay, let me show you another letter to your Aunt Sandy and Uncle Robert. Yes, sir. Do you recognize that? These are what, 2 letters or 3 letters? Do they all seem to be in your handwriting? Yeah, but one thing I'm noticing is that these letters don't have any dates, and I always put dates on my letters. Are you saying we made these up somehow? No? No, I'm just saying that they don't have dates on them. Mr. Hagler says, Your Honor, could we approach the bench? And the court says, You may. And at this point, a discussion was held off the record, and then questioning continues. Mr. Shook says, In this letter, don't you say, quote, well, I guess you heard that they are now saying they found a small amount of one of the boy's blood on my gown. It would have to be Damon's because I was trying to save him, unquote. Yes, sir. That is after you heard about some of the DNA results. Is that right? I don't know that. There is not a date on that letter. Okay, but that is your letter, isn't it? Yes, sir, it is. But when you write to your friends and relatives that you saw him and you know it was him, you were just, that was just wishful thinking? I was wanting to hope? Yes, sir. Okay. Mr. Shook then says, okay, that's all we have, Judge. And the court then says, Mr. Mulder. And Mr. Mulder of the defense says yes and begins his redirect. Darlie, I got into this case the last of October of last year. Did I not? Yes, sir. Okay. Prior to that time, you had a lawyer who had 2 investigators working on this case, didn't he? Yes, sir. Had one by the name of Cliff Jenkins and another one by the name of Ron Cochran? Yes, sir. And they funneled, of course, they were being paid, weren't they? Yes, sir. Mr. Shook then says, Judge, I will object to the leading. And Mr. Mulder says, Judge, he brought this up. And I feel that Mr. Shook says, well, I still object to the leading. The court says, gentlemen, please. Mr. Shook says, I'll object to the leading, Judge. The court says, gentlemen, please. Phrase your questions properly, stop the bickering, and let's get on with it. Mr. Mulder continues. And the investigators would funnel. You have been locked up in jail since June the 18th, haven't you? Yes, sir. So you are dependent upon what is fed to you? Yes, sir. All right. And as a matter of fact, and Mr. Mulder says, mark this as my next exhibit. And then the next exhibit is marked as defendant's exhibit number 97. And then the questioning is continued. Mr. Mulder says, all right, before I get off on this, he made some to do about you letting your boys go with this man who you? Yes, sir. Was your sister with them as well? Yes, that is the only reason that I let them go. You didn't turn them over to this man, did you? No. Let me show you what has been marked for identification and for record purposes as defendant's exhibit number 97. Yes, sir. Okay. Is that a report about Gary and his wife? All right. And I'll ask you if prior to the time that you wrote that letter, you received information from this private investigator that he had gone down to the residence. He had heard about it through the neighborhood? Yes, sir. And he had gone down to the down. Mr. Shook says, Judge, I'll object to his leading. And Mr. Mulder says, well, Judge, this is the only way I can ask. Mr. Shook says, and he is going into facts, not in evidence. And Mr. Mulder says, well, he brought it up. Mr. Shook says, and it is hearsay. And the court says, well, let's just phrase the question right, please. And Mr. Mulder continues. Did the investigator tell you that Miss had let it out to one of the people in the neighborhood? Mr. Shook says, again, I'll object to leading. And Mr. Mulder says, well, this is the only way I can ask the question, Judge. And the court says, well, gentlemen, please. Well, there are other ways. I'll let you ask this question in the interest of time. Please. Mr. Mulder says, all right. And continues that Miss had gone down at 2:30 or 2:45 in the morning and found her husband there? Yes, sir. Fully dressed? Yes, sir. and as if he had been out and about that evening. That is what I was told. Okay. And he had told her at that time that he had gotten up, he thought it might rain. Mr. Shook says, Judge, again, I'll object to the leading. And the court says, I'll sustain the objection. One leading question is fine. Now phrase the questions. Do not testify. I will sustain the objection. Mr. Mulder continues. Well, tell us what else you were told about this man who lived. Mr. Shook then says, and now I'll object to hearsay. Judge. The court says sustained. Mr. Mulder says, all right. Lived down the way from you. Did he not? Yes, sir. And his house is the same floor plan as yours, isn't it? Exactly the same floor plan. Okay. And did you hear from this investigator that had been out prowling around and was, yes, sir, was Mr. Shook then says, Judge, again. And Mr. Mulder says, caught by his wife. Mr. Shook says, again, I object to, Mr. Mulder says, coming in at 2:30 in the morning. The witness says, yes, sir. Mr. Shook says, Judge, again, I object to the leading and the hearsay. The court says, please, Mr. Mulder, please phrase your questions properly. Mr. Mulder says, Judge, I understand, and I will try to put them as artfully as I possibly can. And the court says, good. Mr. Mulder says, but she has a right to answer these letters. And the court says, we do understand that. And if you will phrase your questions properly, she may do that. Mr. Mulder then continues. Well, tell us what you understood about the and what precipitated you writing this letter that you thought that was one of the. Incidentally, we don't have that investigator any longer, do we? No, sir, we don't. All right, but tell the folks on the jury just what you got about this fellow being out and prowling around. He told me that. Mr. Shook says, Judge, I'll object to the hearsay. And the court says, don't say that. And the witness says, I was told. Mr. Shook says, again, Judge, I would object to the hearsay. She can't go into what this investigator told her. It's clearly hearsay. Mr. Mulder says, well, what prompted you to write this letter? I thought that the man had been outside because he had to get laundry at 2:30 in the morning. All right. And he was breathing very hard when he came in, and he was acting strange. Well, Mr. Shook says, Judge, again, we're going all into hearsay. And the court says, well, let's stay away from hearsay, gentlemen. Just what we know, direct questions and answers. Let's move along. Mr. Mulder says, well, Judge, it goes to her state of mind at the time that she wrote that letter. The court says, well, I know it does, Mr. Mulder. And if you will ask your questions in the right way, we can get on with this. And you know how to do it. Mr. Mulder says, well, Judge, perhaps you can give me some guidance. And the court says, well, I will be happy to if you will both approach the bench. Mr. Mulder says, all right, I can use all the help I can get. The court says, all right. And Mr. Mulder says, all right. And then a short discussion is held off the record between the attorneys and the court. And then the proceedings are resumed. And Mr. Mulder then says, I'll ask it just like you said, Judge. And the court says, all right, fine. And Mr. Mulder then continues. Darlie, why did you write those letters? The court says, good. Mr. Mulder says, thank you, Judge. And Mr. Mulder asks Darlie again. He says, you can go ahead and tell the jury why. Because at the time, from what I was being told, that is what I thought. Okay. You are not out being able to do any investigation on your own, are you? No, sir. And do you know whether or not, in fact, this investigator had a videotaped interview? Yes, sir. And the Mr. Shook of the prosecution says, Judge, I will. And the witness says he did. Mr. Shook says, Judge, again, I'll object to the leading, please. And the court says, I'll let her answer the question. Go on and answer it, Mrs. Routier, as succinctly as possible. And the witness says, yes, sir. That is what I was told. Mr. Mulder continues. Where the wife said that he is out in the wee hours of the morning, Mr. Shook says, Judge, I will object again to hearsay and leading. And the court says, well, I'm going to let her answer the question or we will be here forever. Now go ahead. The witness says, yes, sir, that is what I was told. Mr. Mulder continues. All right, your boys had known his son, hadn't they? Yes, sir, they had. With respect to Those investigators also told you about his violent behavior, didn't they? Yes. Mr. Shook says, Judge, again, I'll object to hearsay and to the leading nature of the question. And the court says, overruled. Let's move on, please. The witness says, yes, sir, they did. Mr. Mulder then says, went down to the courthouse and checked to find out where he lived and found out about him, didn't they? Yes, sir. I didn't make up any of this stuff about these people. This is what was being told to me from other people. Of course, you are desperate, aren't you? Yes, sir, very much. Okay. When you talk to your friends about this, Darlie, are they interested in what happened to you? Yes. Do they want to hear what happened that night? Yes, sir. Have you told your friends about what happened that evening as best you recall? Yes, sir. Cooperated with the police on every instance, didn't you? Yes, sir. Cooperated with Bill Parker? Yes, sir. With Patterson? Yes, sir. All of them? Yes, sir. Have you told your friends that about the dreams that you have had or the nightmares that you have had? Yes, sir. Have you told your friends about the psychic that you talked to? Yes, sir. Have you told your friends that you were involved in some sort of fight or altercation? Yes, sir. Were you, in fact, involved in a fight or altercation? Yes, sir. Well, how do you know that? Look at me. It's very obvious to anybody with any common sense can see it. Do you know from the looks of your arms and from these stab wounds in your arms and from the stab wounds in your chest and the slash on your throat that you have been involved in a fight with someone? Yes, sir. Mr. Mulder says, I believe that's all. Thank you. And the court says, Mr. Shook, and Mr. Shook begins his recross. Well, these investigators, you make the statement right here, quote, I know it's him, I saw him, and I know it's him, unquote. They are not, quote, Darlie, you know it's him, you can go ahead and tell people that, unquote. Yes, sir, I was hoping. You were just hoping? Yes, sir. Okay. And Mr. Shook says, I don't have anything further, Judge. And Mr. Mulder says, I believe that's all we have. And the court says, you may step down, ma'am. So Darlie gets off of the stand, and Mr. Mulder of the defense team says, Your Honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this time, the defendant will rest her case in chief. And the court says, all right. Mr. Greg Davis says, yes, sir. May we approach for just a minute? And the court says, you may. And the court says, all right. Mr. Davis says, thank you. And the court says, all right. Members of the jury, that's all of the testimony you will be hearing from the defense on their case in chief. The state has a witness they want to call in rebuttal. He will be here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And before that, we will be ready to go then. So you are excused until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And then the court says, all right, let the record reflect that these proceedings are being held outside the presence of the jury and all parties in the trial are present. All right. Mr. Hagler of the defense team says, okay, we're getting together the letters that they intend to use. It will just take us a second. And the court says, well, just say all of the letters. And Mr. Mulder says, okay, we are ready now. All right. And the court says, back on the record now. Mr. Hagler says, okay, Your Honor, pursuant to the agreement with the court, we make our objections to the testimony regarding the cross-examination of the appellant by use of, the court says, the defendant. Mr. Hagler says, I'm sorry, Judge. I'm just used to writing or dictating briefs. And the court says, I know you are, Mr. Hagler. Mr. Hagler continues, the defendant, by use of her written correspondence to various individuals. And Your Honor, the court stated that we could make this objection to the use of all of those documents. At the present time, we would offer into evidence those documents which we have marked as, which will be marked as defendant's exhibit, whatever the next number is. And the court says, all right, we will make it defendant's exhibit number 98. Mr. Hagler says, and Your Honor, we would submit that under 39.14, under the Texas Code of, the court says, be quiet, please. Thank you. Mr. Hagler then says, all right, thank you, all right. And we're entitled to all written statements made by the defendant. These statements, it is our understanding, and we will ask the prosecutor the question as to whether or not these letters were copied at the time that they were forwarded or sent from the jail by the sheriff's department. Mr. Shook says, these letters are copies that were in possession of Kerr County Sheriff's Office. It was our understanding that they copied all mail going in and all mail going out. They would not give us possession of these. We subpoenaed these today. We subpoenaed all of the correspondence today, and it got over here this afternoon. I have looked at a lot of these letters. Prior to that, we were allowed to view it, but we were not allowed to take it away or to make copies. On the 27th of December of 96, Preston Douglas and Lloyd Harrell were up at the office, and I was showing them photographs on behalf of Mr. Davis. I was told Mr. Douglas at that time that the Kerr County Sheriff had made copies of the mail, but would not give us possession of them. So they were informed at that time. We didn't have possession of them, and we didn't have possession of them until today, Judge. We were allowed to look at them. And the court says, all right, that's fine. All right. Mr. Hagler then says, well, just one thing, Your Honor. Of course, it is our position that the Kerr County Sheriff's Department is simply an arm of the state. And the state did, in fact, have constructive custody of these documents. And we were never given proper notice. And at the time of, prior to the time of the trial, the time that statements of the defendant were tendered pursuant to this court's discovery order, and therefore, in view of Article 39.14 or 38.14, we would urge for a mistrial at this time as a result of the use of these documents without proper discovery. And the court says, all right, motion for mistrial is denied. And your objection, I assume you are objecting? Mr. Hagler says, to the use of these documents. And the court says, that is overruled. You have running objection back from the start as you did approach the bench, and you have a running objection from the start of the presentation of these documents. Mr. Hagler then says, okay, and these documents, Your Honor, they will be an exhibit? And the court says they will be an exhibit. You bet, you bet. Get them all in there. This is off the record. See everybody first thing in the morning. Okay, so let's get into our recap here. So we start off in this episode where the prosecution is asking Darlie about whether or not she had said something to Waddell, who was the first officer on the scene, that she had been fighting with the guy who came into the house. She said no, and that she didn't say this. And if she did, it would have been on the 911 call. Now, provided, though, that this question was asked by Waddell of Darlie while she was on the phone with 911. She's then asked about the paramedic who helped her out of the house and put a bandage on her, and if she made a comment about the man breaking out the window in the garage, and she doesn't remember this. When she's asked about the detectives that questioned her in the hospital about her talking about fighting with this guy on the couch, she said that she wasn't sure. Now, I was interested in this. I went back to Patterson's testimony, and this is what he said. This is just a small portion. He says, I asked her what happened that night. And what did she tell you? She stated that she was asleep on the couch and she woke up to her son, Damon, pressing on her shoulder, saying, Mommy. She then saw a man and she started fighting with him. Did she describe the man she was fighting with? Yes, she described him as wearing dark clothing, a baseball cap, and that he was white. Now remember, though, he is taking this from memory. He said that he questioned Darlie in the hospital as Detective Frosch, who was in the room as well, took notes. However, in Detective Patterson's testimony, he could not find Frosch's notes in his file that he had brought with him, but he testified that he had read them before going on the stand. So this whole Q&A to Darlie about fighting a man, at least in regards to Patterson, is questionable at best, because there's no hard evidence to back up what anybody said. Now, I'll admit the whole beginning of the questioning, where she is asked if she remembers saying anything to not only the detectives, but the nurses that saw her over the course of a couple of days that she was in the hospital, had me not really buying into it. Then I realized that all of these questions related to the detectives and the nurses, this all occurred while she was in the hospital, and it's very, very likely that she doesn't remember any of this. And I only know this because I've personally had to be hospitalized and had surgery. And for the life of me, I couldn't tell you half of what was said or what I said or who even took care of me. So, yeah, I totally get how you could not remember that if you were in the hospital. The prosecutor then grills Darlie about what she told her friend Mercedes about fighting some guy off. And Darlie said it was a dream. And we've heard about this before because these dreams have been talked about before. But I want to point out something here. Remember how in a previous testimony, we never got to hear what this psychic said? Her and Darren had brought in a psychic and they had walked through their home, but this was never expanded on because it was objected to as being hearsay. Well, here we learn that evidently the psychic had told Darlie that the man was over her with a knife and she tried to fight him off, and that's how the cut got onto her arm. So take that for what you will. The prosecutor then tries to make it seem like it was wrong to not take the boys up to their rooms after they had fallen asleep downstairs. And again, I've mentioned this before, but this guy, he will take the most normal things and make them seem as if they're a terrible thing to do. If you have kids and they've fallen asleep somewhere, especially if they had specifically wanted to sleep there, you are not going to run the chance of waking them up by picking them up and carrying them to their rooms. You're not. I mean, other people might have different opinions, but no. As a mom, no. Yeah, hey, this is where you wanted to sleep. That's fine. The questioning then gets into their finances, and Darlie admits that the business was a little slow for a couple of months and money was tight. But then the prosecutor asks her about this trip to Pennsylvania that they were planning to take in the middle of June, and the one that Darlie was going to take with Mercedes at the end of July. The thing is, though, we know that the tickets for Pennsylvania, they had been purchased months earlier. And as far as the trip with Mercedes goes, we don't learn when they were purchased, these tickets, but the chances are that they were probably pretty early on too, especially if everyone who was going had to get all of their schedules in order. It just makes sense. Mr. Shook, he is attempting to make it out that even with these money issues, all of these things were purchased as if they were purchased at this same exact time that they were having these financial issues and not some other time. We find out that Darlie had called into a radio show on December 5th, and she must have done this from the jail because by this time she had already been arrested. And during this interview, she says that she knows what happened that night, that she did not murder her children, and that she wants people to keep an open mind. She also wrote to her Aunt Sandy. Now, this Aunt Sandy has been in the courtroom this entire time taking notes of absolutely everything. Now, a few years later, a news story was done on her, and I'll have that in a later episode. But for now, I just wanted you to be aware of who Aunt Sandy is. Now, this letter that Darlie wrote to her was on November 1st of 1996. And again, this is after she had been arrested, but this was before the phone call to the radio station to do this interview. In this letter, Darlie said that she saw the guy and she knows who it is. She says that there is an FBI guy working on it and that Darren knows about it. She also wrote to Karen and told Karen that she knew who did it, but she wasn't able to write it down, or she said she can't write it down because they read her mail. In another letter to Karen, she tells her that she believes that Glenn did it. How Darlie said she talked to the police about it, but they didn't do anything, and that her mom, Darlie Key, and Darren could give Karen all of the details. In another letter to Joe and Terry, Darlie writes that she has heard that there might be another suspect, and this is one who lived down the street. Now, the sock evidently is directly in the path towards this person's house. He evidently was outside at 2:30 in the morning, and his wife actually gave a statement that she heard him come back into the house that night around 2:30 in the morning. And other neighbors behind the Routiers testified that they heard dogs barking also around that time of night. She puts a name to this guy and said that the kids know him. She also said that this guy lives all the way at the end of the block and that from his balcony, he could see into her hot tub. Now, this is one thing that I do, in fact, find very unbelievable. But Darlie said that this is what was told to her. But by whom? We don't know. Darlie then writes to other family members, again saying that she knows who did it and that it was either this Glenn guy or Gary who lived just down from Darlie. There are more letters that go out to others that seem to really hone in on Glenn. So when the defense finally gets their chance to talk to Darlie and question her again, one of the things that's immediately addressed is that of letting her kids go off with the stepfather that Darlie had accused of her when she was younger. Darlie then lets us in on some more information about this, where we learn that the only reason that she let them go was because her sister was with them. We then hear about some private investigators and how they looked into this guy who lived at the end of the block from Darlie. And this guy knew her boys because he also had a son of his own that evidently her boys hung out with. We also discover that there was a videotaped interview done by one of these investigators with this man who lived down the street. Now, after all of this, the defense rested their entire case. But the prosecution wants to bring in another witness, which will happen in the next episode. And at the end of all of this, Darlie is off the stand. The jury has left the room. There's a discussion about these letters that Darlie had written while in jail. So evidently, the sheriff's office copied all of the correspondence going in and out of the jail. And the prosecutors were not allowed to take any of these copies with them. But some of the prosecution team was able to read them. So the day that these letters showed up in court was the first day that the prosecution had them in their possession, and it was because they had subpoenaed these letters. And it was also the first time that the defense had ever seen them. So Mr. Hagler of the defense team argued that according to Article 39.14 of the Texas Code, and this code is meant to ensure a fair sharing of evidence, he said these letters should have been turned over earlier. And this delay, or at least a lack of communication about what they were doing, seems really like a blatant disregard for the rules and for the fairness of the court. So you can imagine, or for the fairness of the trial. So you can imagine how surprised the defense was to hear about these letters that, they didn't even know about. So despite this, the judge still allowed the letters to be used in court. And then when Mr. Hagler requested a mistrial, this was denied. And that's where we end with Darlie's testimony. So next up on the witness stand will be William Parker. And this is a private detective who spoke with Darlie on the day that she was arrested. And that will do it for this episode. Thank you. Thank you all so much for listening. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel no matter where you listen. Also, if you'd like to support the show, you can do so through Buy Me a Coffee, and I will have a link for that in the show notes below. Thanks again, everyone. We will talk really soon. Bye for now.